technological uptake and advancements have occurred at a decent pace in recent years. The pace of innovation remains undiminished. Artificial intelligence has been making an impact in financial services and many other sectors in ways that including powering recommendation engines and chatbots that aid customer service. Experts also predict that the metaverse will add $5 trillion to the global economy by 2030, and by 2023 will be the year that defines the direction of that particular technology. Web3 is growing as more companies decentralize their products and services. What technologies are gaining the most traction both here in Nigeria and globally, and what are the most important trends that business leaders should be prepared for? Will ChatGPT become the most revolutionary thing this side of our century? Well, joining me to discuss these trends are two incredible and expert tech gurus. First with me in the studio is Nkemdilim Begho, FSCGN, the CEO of Future Software Resources Limited, a seasoned information technology professional and senior board executive who is committed to transforming Nigeria's digital landscape and was one of Forbes' top 10 female tech founders in Africa. Also joining me virtually from Silicon Valley is Adeniyi Abiodun, co-founder and chief product officer of Misting Labs, whose company is working to accelerate Web3 adoption. He also founded one of the world's largest cloud mining services in the Bitcoin space. He previously led Meta's R&D initiatives in blockchain and crypto. Welcome to the show, Nkem and Adeniyi. Great to see you both. Thanks for joining me from the Bay Area, Adeniyi. Hopefully it's not too early for you over there. So I guess my first question, which I'll push to you, Nkem, is what were the big digital highlights for you in 2022 that really transformed the technological landscape?
So I think the first one is sort of Facebook changing their name to Meta, and I think that's a really big signal that the metaverse is becoming mainstream, right? And I think that signal to other brands, especially smaller organizations that have already been doing work in that space, to really, dig deeper and work a little bit more. And like you said in your introduction, right, $5 trillion in addition to the digital economy, that's what this, sort of technology can bring. I think the other sort of big things, obviously ChatGPT and other AI technologies, whether it is across marketing or content development or even across compliance and risk management. I think we've seen much more adoption for AI. And then the last one that I would mention is sort of high performance computing. I think we're seeing quantum computing taking a much more mainstream space, and really you now see a lot more combination between quantum computing and classic computing, where you then also understand that this is what's going to drive AI, it's what's going to drive adoption of IoT. So I think we're going to see much more smart devices, smart packaging, come out in the near future.
Thank you. Very interesting. So, Adeniyi, I'll come to you. I mean, you're bang in the middle of the tech verse, I would argue. What for you were the main digital highlights of 2022 that really transformed the landscape?
Yeah, I think I'll corroborate what was said by my co-guest here. I think, look, ideally there are three things that really speak to mind. First being metaverse. There was by June last year, there's like 120 billion invested in the space, and Meta being one of the big proponents of what's going on there. And I think they've sparked on a lot of excitement in the space, and you see VCs throwing money in that space at a remarkable rate, whether it's gaming, whether it's NFTs, whether it's anything around content creation. There's a lot of growth in that area that we call the metaverse, and it's still to be known of what's that really going to look like in the next 3 to 4 years. Whether it's Meta's own platform or other open source platforms, it remains to be seen, but exciting nonetheless. The second, of course, is AI. That we're hearing ChatGPT, but that it's interesting that AI has been largely flat in terms of adoption since 2017, and it's only really seen. In fact, we'll probably think ChatGPT might be the biggest proponent of a growth in adoption for that, because it's going to really expand the use cases that brings it down to the level of a common man in a large extent. Finally, I think crypto is another, right? We know about HPC, but HPC aligns itself very, very well what's going on with crypto in addition to what's going on in AI. But I think crypto, from a large perspective, we've seen digitization accelerate at a rapid rate. And crypto has been in the news for a very long time, and I think it's only going to continue. And we talk about the death of crypto every single year, and it keeps on getting stronger and stronger.
Yeah, indeed. And, I'll stick with you for a moment to ask a bit more about crypto. There's been growing regulation of cryptocurrencies and exchanges. Of course, we saw what happened with FTX and others. I'm going to be sort of hard pressed to ask you, is it the end of crypto or really just the opening of a new chapter? I think you sort of answered that to a certain extent, but what are your thoughts on how regulation will shape the crypto landscape in 2023?
Sure. I mean, I've been involved in crypto since 2012. I've been in this space for almost a decade, and every year we have a new mantra of the death of crypto. So we're very used to it at this point. It's becoming like a playbook that we expect on an annual basis to a large extent. Look, the reality is we do need regulation. There needs to be clear guidelines for what you can and can't do with customer funds. And it's interesting that while the part that actually hurt crypto this time around is actually traditional centralized banking, if not, really printing money that doesn't really exist, that's been happening by the likes of FTX. But reality is, the DeFi space has actually been largely unscathed as a result. So it's been actually quite resilient to a large extent. So there needs to be regulation to bring more clarity and even greater consumer protection. But is crypto here to stay? Absolutely. It's been here for long enough. And I think if you look at the growth of digitization in terms of people using cashless systems for payments, crypto is only going to be a large proponent. And when you marry that with what's happening with the metaverse and AI, you have these virtual worlds where you're engaging with virtual bots, and then you have a digital form of payment. I think that's going to be an interesting trifecta that's going to really increase, really do wonders for the economy.
Yeah, thank you very much. And, Nkem, I'm coming back to you. I have to ask you, someone listening to this is thinking, what does this all mean to me, right? And so let's look at the Nigerian landscape. How do you think this is actually going to impact commerce and business? And maybe you can even give some examples of things that have happened that are quite mind-boggling locally.
Well, I think, we've seen a massive adoption of crypto in the Nigerian market, right? So when you look at, sort of Bitcoin trading, Nigeria was the biggest player until there were regulations put in place to, sort of shut that down. And I think that that's actually quite counterproductive. And, like Abiodun said, we do need regulations, but they have to be sort of in line with what is actually happening in the consumer markets, right? And I think that there are going to be more and more organizations that will leverage crypto across board, right? Whether it is through NFTs, I think we're seeing a really big...
Non-fungible tokens. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So we're seeing a really big adoption in the luxury space, globally. And I think that, and loyalty as well. And I think that Nigerian brands are going to start adopting this. And when you look in the Nigerian fintech space, there's still a lot of fintechs that are, they put on the cloak of a fintech, but they really are building DeFi solutions. And they really are building, everything that is based on some type of cryptocurrency. And I think that's really where the future is, and we just need to make sure that we're, following with regulation and protecting the consumer at the end of the day.
And I know FutureSoft, your company does a lot of consulting for firms across different industries. What sort of trends are you seeing in terms of their digital requirements? What are the common themes they're asking you about to adopt for the business?
Yeah, so I think it's sort of across three key areas. So there's information architecture. So whether this is like cloud computing, mixed cloud or hybrid cloud, microservices, and really sort of just breaking everything within the organization down into those microservices, or whether organizations want to build super apps where they become platform businesses. We're seeing a lot around API marketplaces as well, especially in the financial service sector. If you recall, EcoBank launched theirs, in 2021, and other banks followed suit during the year. I think that will become bigger and bigger. Automation obviously is, a big theme as well that we hear. And this can be internal process automation and optimization, as well as, sort of the customer experience, and looking at how do we serve the customer, how do we make automated recommendations, how do we integrate chatbots, and then obviously within the internal processes, how do you, for example, within financial services, approve a loan with a bot? This has brought loan approvals from 2 to 3 days down to 23 seconds.
Yeah.
And then the last trend is really around more of strategy. So whether this is digital transformation strategy, cyber strategy, or just, how do we actually position to future-proof our businesses? So we're seeing a lot of those type of requests coming in, and a lot of executive training as well, where executives want to actually understand what do we need to know in order to make the right decisions, both at management level and at board level.
Yeah, so very, very interesting there, looking at the actual physical hardware or software side of it and then the strategy side. Yeah. So Adeniyi, listening to that, it sounds to me like many of these technologies clearly have a huge addressable market, which, when looking from the perspective of an investor, means that they're highly valued companies. Now, I saw somewhere recently, some weeks ago, there was roughly a $29 billion valuation being attributed to a new technology like ChatGPT. Now, I don't want to focus necessarily on ChatGPT, but in terms of the value and size and attractiveness of many of these emerging technologies for investors, do you think that they're based on the realities, or are we likely to see significant adjustments when we start to test these technologies and realize maybe it's not as incredible as we once thought? I know you've raised funding as a company. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, only time will tell. I mean, back on ChatGPT, $1 billion invested in 2019 by Microsoft, and now we're talking about a $29 billion valuation, right? With Microsoft potentially or allegedly investing $10 billion. I think it's a story of Microsoft controlling where that technology goes or where it sits. Because if you think about it, it was only 5 years ago that Microsoft had, the dilemma with their own AI bot that was basically responsible for creating a lot of hateful speech. And they really backed up very, very quickly. I think it was called Toy. It generated a lot of racist, xenophobic, and other really dirty language. And, I think ChatGPT has done a great job in terms of handling some of the responses that could be deemed hateful by other platforms. And I think that's the area. There's still an era of skepticism as to whether they can actually solve that problem in the short term. But I think the investment by Microsoft goes a long way in terms of integrating some of these really great technologies into their own class of products and building the online infrastructure, whether it's the servers, whether HPC computing that's required to process it, to allow for a future where they can actually compete. And if you think about how that changes a story or narrative for Google, I know for a fact Google's at this point going to be really concerned, because if I can start asking Google questions related to very interesting questions I would normally ask the Google server, and ChatGPT can provide very succinct responses to solve the problem, then it questions what the ad model is going to be in the long term, right? Like if I can ask a question of a bot and it can give me a very succinct answer rather than looking at 5 different web pages, then the model for monetization for Google starts to become very questioned, especially when ads is over 50% of their revenues today. Yeah,
very, very interesting indeed. It'll be interesting to see how all those merger and acquisition moves pan out. So I want us to sort of look at, what I would call the real world. But the world is facing so many major challenges: insecurity, conflict, climate change. And I was wondering, Nkem, how do you see technology and digital trends helping us to solve some of these big global problems? I mean, we're seeing a major war in Russia, Ukraine. Climate change is a perennial theme. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that, COVID and obviously also the Russia-Ukraine war has shown us the global interconnectedness, right? But it has also shown us sort of the power of technology within that, whether it is around fundraising or, some kind of disaster responses. I think there is a trend going towards sustainable technology that is driven by ESG adoption globally by, all the big organizations that will definitely drive the, sort of us using technology for good. And I think you have things like digital twin technology where you can create models of real life scenarios in a digital and virtual setting. And I think that in combination with data will actually really help us to look at, okay, what are the scenarios that are, going to happen? So I think technology will help us do a lot more strategic scenario planning as a global economy, and really also allow us to really think about our issues in terms of supply chain, in terms of environment, in terms of also all of this technology actually contributing to, very high energy consumption and things like that. And how do we address all of those things? So I think that we really just need to, leverage on that global connectedness, leverage on data that is available globally, and then use the technology to sort of analyze that data and predict and create scenarios that you can look at what is the worst case, what is sort of the okay case, and what is the best case scenario for all of these different things.
Obviously great for anticipating trends and outcomes and for planning, but giving the centrality of technology and digital to development globally, do you think as an economy, Nigeria as a country is spending enough on the digital economy? What are your thoughts? I don't know whether you had a look at the 2023 budget and whether you could assess how well we did on that front.
Yeah, so the 2023 budget obviously is a very difficult budget overall because when you look at it, 60% of the entire budget is allocated to debt repayment, personnel charge, costs, and other types of expenses. And that in itself makes it very difficult for you to then, sort of just take the digital economy budget in isolation.
Of course.
Right? I think you need to put that into context, because if you don't have money, you can't spend money. Would we be spending more? Of course. So the current digital economy budget is about 46 billion naira, which is $106 million. Not a lot,
a drop in the ocean.
Exactly, right? Especially when you then hear about these type of investments that are being done into one single technology, right, by one single organization, then it puts it really into perspective. However, I do think that when it comes to the technology sector and the digital economy in Nigeria, it has never really been driven by the federal government. It has been driven by the infrastructure developed in the private sector. So when you look at how much Airtel and MTN, and other telcos have put into infrastructure development to push 5G, they've spent over 400 billion, right? So that you then kind of look at
because the private sector will be leading in this space, and what the government obviously needs to do is to create a sort of conducive environment for those investors to
But I think that the government can do that by focusing on policy, right? So I think you don't have money, but you can actually focus on policy to make sure that the private sector is enabled to help you push that development.
Thanks for those insights. So Adeniyi, I'm going to come back to you because locally here we've been seeing a phenomenon called the Jackpass Syndrome, which is a lot of young people, including those in the tech industry, going for greener climes elsewhere, including Silicon Valley. I know many young Nigerians, of course you're one of them, you've been there for a while, what do you think these new technologies will mean? Are many of these young people sufficiently equipped to utilize this and sort of empower themselves economically? And are we going to see an outflux of young Africans moving to the Bay Area, California, to glean a better life in the tech sector?
Yeah, there's certainly a few things. One, namely, the workforce is becoming global by default anyway. So I think companies are becoming very accustomed to the fact that people migrate and people are moving anywhere they want to work. I think the last 2 years has shown that we can do that relatively well with severe efficiency. And that's only going to continue. And that creates new opportunities for those who are in existing markets to actually either stay where they are. But in reality, if the infrastructure you have is not sufficient, or the education system doesn't allow you to actually increase your intellectual wealth, then you're going to find more people leaving countries that are underdeveloped to countries that can actually serve them accordingly. So, while we are seeing migration of folks to different markets to take advantage of either low cost of living, I do think the winners will be areas where you do actually have great infrastructure, great low cost of living, and understandably great laws to support working people.
Yeah,
we've seen it certainly in our company. We are a U.S. company, but we hire people from all over the world. We have at least 10 people in Greece. We have 10 people in London. We don't have anyone in Africa yet. But it's a market we're very interested in. It's a market that's certainly going to grow.
Okay, thanks. And I have to ask you on the fundraising landscape for tech startups. I know Misting Labs recently raised, I think it was north of $300 million. How do you think that will pan out in 2023 as we wrap up? And of course, I'll come back to Nkem to give her thoughts on that.
Yeah, given that we're in a semi-recession at this point, we've certainly seen the check size reduce, and they're high for very high conviction investments, right? But I think the new starts, companies starting from scratch are seeing very slow turnaround in terms of from when they start pitching to when they actually close the deal. So I think the bar is certainly higher. And I think gone are the early days of like FOMO of investors jumping into a deal just because you hear someone else is involved. But I think there's a lot of focus on due diligence. I think that's a good thing for the market, by the way, because I think a lot of companies shouldn't be getting funded, but they were.
Yeah.
I think at the same time as well, I am also worried that the distribution of wealth, the distribution of investment is certainly becoming more centralized. And I think that's one thing I'd like to see a bit of better improvement in.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. And Nkem, your big headline tech transformational trend in 2023 as we wrap up the program?
I think it will definitely be around AI and just seeing how AI impacts different types of industries, right? Whether it's healthcare, whether it's manufacturing. I think there's so much potential in using AI, to optimize processes, to make things better, to also understand consumer behavior much better and help with, sort of like your go-to-market strategies and things like that.
Thank you. Well, you heard it here. Artificial intelligence is one to watch in 2023. Thank you so much, Adeniyi Abiodun of Misting Labs and Nkemdilim Begho of Future Software Limited.